Hey, I'm Blair Johnson, and you are listening to the Rock Student Ministry Podcast. For more information, you can visit www.fbcrockhill.org. Now a word from our high school and college pastor.
Hey guys, it's Chris. Great to be back with you on Proverbs 9:9 Podcast Ministry. Today we have a special segment talking about money and finances and teenagers. And today with me I have the CFO, the CEO, and the COO of a financial planning advising company, Michael Baker, and he'll tell you more about himself in just a minute. But one of the reasons why I wanted to put together this podcast is because finances and parenting and students is a lot like the economy. It's a trickle-down effect. Students learn from their parents, what their parents do and how they do that. And for me, I would say that education was not the best. And so I wanted to bring on somebody who this is their profession. This is what they do. And so with that being said, I want to welcome Michael Baker. Michael, tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into this, what makes this tick for you, and then we'll dive into these 5 principles.
Well, Chris, thank you for having me. I have to correct you on one thing, though. I'm not the CEO. My business partner would take issue. So if anything, I'm the co-CEO of Vertex Capital Advisors up in Fort Mill, South Carolina. I've been in this business now for over a decade, and it's just something that's really grown into a passion for me because there's such a need, right, across all different types of households, all different types of families. People need help in various ways with their money, and I just love doing it. I feel like it's a great way to, to serve others and to provide value in the marketplace. I fell into it, somewhat haphazardly, but as I said, now I've got the credentials behind my name. I have a lot of letters behind my name that a lot of people don't know what they mean, but I am a certified financial planner. I'm a certified investment management analyst, and I have a couple of other designations. And like I was telling you, I just finished up a graduate certificate in financial life planning with Golden Gate University. Right. So I'm still a student of this just as much as I am a professional.
There you go. Well, good deal. Well, listen, I appreciate you being here today. So we're going to dive in and try to maximize our time with our listeners today. One of the first things I want to talk about that's a principle every teen should know is about planning. Budgeting is more than just about budgeting. It's about planning. Zig Ziglar said, if you aim at nothing, you will hit it every time. The Apostle Luke wrote in Luke 14:28, but don't begin until you count the cost. For who would begin construction of a building without first calculating the cost to see if there's enough money to finish it? Our students these days and our parents deal with them about planning. They plan for their athletic future. They plan for their educational future. They might help them plan for their marriage, whether it's a guy or a girl, and what kind of spouse or boyfriend or girlfriend they should be looking for. But I think one of the areas they don't do a lot of education is in planning for their future when it comes to financial. So from your seat, from what you know, how important is that planning process? How does that begin kind of in a 30,000 foot view? And what should a parent teach a student today about planning?
Well, one of the things that we teach people when they work with us is we have a plan first philosophy. And what that means is we don't do anything until we know why we're trying to do it, what we are trying to accomplish. It's not just about like investing. Well, why are we investing? It's not just about saving. Like, well, why are we saving? Why is that important? Why is that important to you? What kind of meaning will that bring? Or, what does that mean for you and your family? And one of the biggest things is it could be really easy for us to think about life events. Like you mentioned, a marriage, like a wedding day, right? Well, that day is coming, right, at some point. It's got a finite, it exists in, one time and space, but planning over your life, that's much more vague for a lot of people. Right. And so the tendency is to kind of just do it as we go. And unfortunately, that is not a very good or a sound financial strategy. So one of the things that parents can be talking to their kids about is just different phases of life and talking to them about their own journey. One of the things that I personally feel that we don't do enough of is talk about money in our households. Right. Money is this big taboo, and parents often think that kids they don't need to know about money. They don't need to know about what's going on in the household. And I'm a big proponent of helping educate, helping kids understand what their teenage years, what they need to be thinking about, their college years, early 20s, 30s, when they start a family, 40s, 50s. And one of the best ways that parents can do that is talk to them about their own life experiences, the lessons that they learned along the way, and the different phases of life that they're in. Because who is better equipped to talk to your own kids about money than you?
Right. Yeah. So, with planning, it's a budgeting thing, and we budget more than money. We budget time. We budget our resources, whether it's things that we own, tangible things. And so I think for that planning or that budgeting aspect, not only is it important to teach them about budgeting and their money, but it's also it's encompassing of their time and all that. So if you can teach students, if parents can, of how to budget something as simple as their time, then it also translates in helping them budget their money, which we know a lot of people just aren't good at that planning, budgeting phase. Like you said, they kind of wait till it shows up and it's like, oh, hey, now we got this. Whether it be an event or whether it be a debt. Second thing I think that's important, it's an important principle for every parent to talk to the teen about, is savings. Not just saving for now, but also saving for later. Genesis 41-48, this was in our weekly reading plan this past month,
right?
Said, during those years, Joseph gathered all the crops grown in Egypt and stored the grain from the surrounding fields in the cities. Now, we know the story is about Joseph knowing that there was going to be 7 years of great harvest, but there's going to be 7 years of famine. Joseph had insight to this, but you and I and parents, we don't have insight to when there's going to be a crash in the economy of '08, if you will, or from the 40s and the Depression. If you listen to economists now, they're saying that we're spending a whole lot of money and we have very little to borrow from anymore. So one thing that they do is they drop the interest rates. Well, interest rates are at the bottom right now. So now where do you find that recovery from? And you can speak to that a lot better than I can. But when it comes to saving, how do we teach our students about saving, or our kids about saving? And then what is the main thing that we would need to teach them about savings?
Well, I think first thing is the time-tested principle that anything you practice, you tend to get good at. And so if you don't save, you won't be a very good saver, right? And it will be very difficult for you to form that habit later on in life. You might be a really good spender. Right. And we see that a lot of times in couples. There'll be a saver and a spender that they get paired up, opposites attract in that way.
Right.
But, to your point, what you mentioned about the story of Joseph, what I love about that story is nothing snuck up on them. Joseph had warning, and he went to Pharaoh, and he said, hey, Pharaoh, here's the meaning of your dream.
Right.
And then they had to do what? They had to plan, because they had to build granaries to hold all of this harvest. So there was a plan for them to save. So I would tell, that is a great analogy for the purpose of saving. Again, why are we saving? So there's your plan. So why are we saving? Are we saving just because so we can? No, we're saving for certain things. Yes, you might want to make a purchase down the road.
Right.
You might want to save up because you want to go to college and you're going to need to have funds on the side to do that. You might want to save up because in teenage years, a lot of parents want their kids to go out and work and have a job. Well, if you start saving, maybe there's another job you want to have, and you need to get some training or do something, and you're going to have a period of time where you're without work. Well, what are you going to do for spending money? You have some savings. It's all about building those habits, because, as your ability to earn gets larger, your capacity to save gets larger. So it's about building those habits early on, because those will be with you for the rest of your life.
Right. So, it's kind of unique that the planning, which we talked about first,
right,
leads to savings, because if you have to budget, then you have to save to budget. I would say that there's probably a difference between short-term saving and long-term saving. So can you kind of speak to that for a minute? How would you advise if I were a teenage client or a mom and a dad coming in with their daughter, and I asked you to explain to my child about short-term and long-term saving? What would be some keys to that?
Well, one of the things that, and I'm just going to make an assumption here that when you say long-term saving, you're kind of leaning into the investing realm, and if I'm not, that correct me. But what I would tell people is, we go through different phases of life, and when you sit in front of a teenager, it's really difficult to get them to think about themselves being 60 years old.
Right.
But life happens so fast. And so what I would encourage them to do is I would say, well, let's think about what you would like your life to be like. what kind of life do you envision having for yourself? And you'll usually hear, well, I'd love to travel, or I'd like to go visit places. Well, what do you need to do these things? You're going to need money, right? Because money is a tool that enables a lot of things. And one of my mentors in the financial services industry is a man named Carl Richards. And he says a lot, money equals feelings.
Right.
And so what I would do is, and this is, again, getting back to parents talking to your kids, finding out what makes them tick, what drives them, because that will be the keys to open up. Like, okay, so you want to, have an art studio or have an art hobby. Well, how are you going to fund that?
Right.
You have to begin creating a plan for yourself so you can have the financial resources that you provide for yourself. Saving is the way to do that. And then, some of these longer term goals, you have to fund them. So the way that we do that is through saving. And if you sit down and you do the math, a lot of times what you'll find is like, well, I'm never going to be able to save enough with my earning potential to do that, to retire in this way, to have a vacation home. Well, the way that you do that is you begin to, dip into the world of investing, where you have the ability to earn a greater rate of return on your money than you can by sticking it in the bank. And so the way I would split things out, talking to a teenager, I said, look, we're going to have some short-term goals. We're going to, if your car breaks down, if you need to get your hands on some emergency cash, we need some money set aside for liquidity. That's your short-term bucket.
Right.
But your long-term, your goals and dreams bucket, like that's money that we don't necessarily see ourselves needing today or wanting to use today. And so we're going to put that money in a different bucket, and we're going to try to grow it for the long-term things that we want to accomplish. And that's a very basic way to start broaching that conversation. And the thing, and I will stress this for parents, any parents that are listening, let your kids mess this up.
Right.
Let them mess it up, because we want kids, teenagers, maybe even college age, young, freshmen, sophomores, we want them making mistakes and skinning their knees when the stakes are small.
Right.
We don't want them to bungle things when they're 40.
Exactly.
And you got to come in and bail them out, or they're going to call you and ask you to bail them out, right? So let them mess this up early, because that's how we learn.
Right. Exactly. Well, good deal. So, in that saving aspect, I think one of the things that most parents don't understand is investment. They have a kind of a narrow vision of that. Now, I'm not saying all parents, because some do a really great job. Some invest in property, some invest in stocks and bonds, some invest in high risk, some invest in low risk. And so I think that's where somebody like yourself and a company like yourself is able to give some advising and enough to train somebody so they can learn to do that themselves. And then as they get older, before they make that mistake, be able to pick up the phone and say, hey, I'm really considering this. What's your professional opinion? So we do it with everything else, right? So why don't we do it with our finances? So I think that's a great aspect. But part of that savings and part of that budgeting and planning is also thinking about giving. From a biblical standpoint, giving is powerful, because not only does it change the person that you're giving to, but it changes the giver. I've seen this in my own life. Mark 12:43, Jesus called his disciples to him and said, I tell you the truth, this poor widow has given more than all the others who are making contributions, for they gave a tiny part of their surplus, but she, poor as she is, has given everything she had to live on it. And that's a principle that everything that we own, you own, I own, it is a gift from God. And so we don't own it, we're just stewards of it, which is where we get that word stewardship. And I think to be able to teach students young, that it's as important to give as it is to save, because the principle and I know the principle. You can't outgive God. The more you give, the more he blesses. If he can trust you with a little, he'll trust you with a lot. But we live in a world where some people want to say that it's all that I can keep for myself, and how big can I get that account? And saving is big, but you and I both know we can't take it to the grave with us. It is going to do us no good on the other side of eternity. So giving is a big part of that. In your world of financial planning and budgeting and stuff like that, how often do you run across parents and kids that come in and say, hey, here's my goals, but I also want to be able to give away this amount? Does that ever come across, and how do you see that in your industry?
What's rare is to see people say, hey, I want to them to put a specific amount on it, because what I find is my generous folks, the people that are, just intuitively generous, they're generous with everything.
Right.
So if they have a windfall that they're unexpected, they're not going to sit there and say, well, I already hit my amount for the year, I'm not going to they give on everything. And it's kind of built into who they are. And I love that. And to what you were saying as far as generosity goes, I think, I've obviously, as a financial professional, I've dug into the Bible a good bit, and I don't purport to know everything that God's saying, but one of the things that I've come to believe wholeheartedly is that money is a tool,
right?
And when God gives the warning in the Bible, and Christ gives the warning in the Bible about a man cannot serve two masters, he's warning people that not to fall in love with the tools,
right,
but to fall in love with who gave you the tools, right? And to serve him. And so that is what I see often. And one of the things that's a big misconception, and it's put out in all different types of communication in our media, but one of the things that is, and this is what we call in our industry a money script, right? It's a subconscious belief that you are given. Somehow you picked it up along the way, but it may or may not necessarily be true. And that money script is that wealthy, rich people are greedy.
Right.
And they got that way by taking advantage of other people. That's not always the case. In fact, a lot of really wealthy people are extraordinarily generous.
Right.
They're and they don't always, like the Bible says, when you do your giving, don't do it and with the sound of trumpets so everybody sees what you're doing. That's how a lot of wealthy people give.
Right.
They're very under the radar generous. And just like saving, that's a habit. It's something that becomes part of you.
Right,
and
exactly.
So the earlier you begin, one of the most profound things that I had a conversation with a gentleman when I was in my 20s, and he made the comment, and he said, "Look, if I can't give $1,000 on $10,000, how will I ever give $100,000 on $1 million?"
Right.
He said, you won't, because the numbers will be so big, and so that's the thing that I look at when I think about generosity. It's a beautiful thing, and you're absolutely right. It benefits the giver just as much, if not more, as it blesses those who receive it.
Right. Yeah. You hear people talk about the lottery, and they say, God, if you just let me win the lottery, I'll give 90% to the church and keep 10% to myself. And you can't help but think God's saying, listen, I already give you money, and you still don't give any of it. So why would I trust you with that? And so I'm sure in your profession, you see people that are financially well off, and you see that when they give, God blesses them with more. The same way people who are maybe financially struggling, but they still see the need to give. That's part of their DNA. That's who what God's commanded them to do, and they're following that commandment. Mm-hmm. And yet they still continue to come back and say, Michael, I don't know how this happened, but man, I got this money and now it's time to invest it, but I only want to invest this because I'm going to give the rest of it away.
Yeah.
And for a guy like you, if you were secular, you would just say, that doesn't make sense. Let's hold on to that money. Let's invest it. Let's triple it. And they're saying, no, it's important for me to give it away. So I think that's big. Part of also giving is spending. We have, and I've always said this, that our teenage population has the most expendable income of any generation that's living right now. Mm-hmm. I'm not really sure sometimes where they get it. Mom and dad gives it. Grandma, grandpa give it. They have side hustles, that sort of thing. I know you can make a lot of money babysitting and cutting grass.
Right.
But in the spending aspect, Ecclesiastes 3:1 says, there is a time for everything and a season for every activity. So there's a time for spending. There's a time for saving. But when it comes to spending, you hear Dave Ramsey and other people talk about different spending philosophies. You got a budget that's guiding you. But when you want to spend, you know that you have X amount for this and X amount for that and X amount of this. So you hear stuff like having envelopes where you have an envelope for entertainment, an envelope for gas, an envelope for this. So that when that envelope's dry, guess what? You just don't get to do it that week. So as you're advising parents with students when it comes to spending, how would you advise them in such a way that makes them a good steward of their money?
This is going back to knowing who the client is when I'm speaking to the teenager or the parent, right?
Right.
Because mom and dad, they're going to have what they want, and then that may not always be what the kid wants.
Right.
And we have to reconcile that, because I feel like a lot of times we have to meet people where they are. And I could tell somebody, and I had this conversation just the other day, it's like, I can give you the mathematical case for why you should do this. But if it doesn't ring true for you, it doesn't ring true for you.
Right.
And I can't expect someone to say, we as people, we're not perfectly rational beings when it comes to money. Clearly we're not, right? So we can't expect to say, oh, well, if the math says it, then that's what I'm doing, because that is not how people are wired. And so what I would help people understand is, like, well, number one, when you mention some of these jobs, like you mentioned, cutting grass, babysitting, there are ways to earn money.
Right.
The lesson that I would want to give my teenagers is, look at what you're doing. You're trading your hours for dollars. How does that trade-off work? Because I think the lesson early on is, a lot of people don't understand this, Chris, is like, in our economic system, our marketplace rewards the value that you bring.
Right.
There's a lot of people that can cut grass. There's a lot of people that can babysit kids, and God bless those people that do it. Is that what you want to be doing for the rest of your life? No. Well, let's figure out a plan so that you can go to college or go to a 2-year school and figure out how you can grow your skills so that you can earn more.
Right.
So that you can save more, give more, spend more, right?
Right.
And so that's how I would begin the lesson about spending, because your capacity to do anything and everything you want to do is going to be constrained by your ability to earn and spend. Right. So, and then the big lesson about spending is, and this is something that every parent could talk to their kids. If you show me your bank statement or show me your credit card statement, I will show you what your priorities are. Exactly. I will show you what your values are. So you can't tell me, oh, I really want to do this. I really want to, save for this. And then I pull up your bank statement or I pull up your credit card statement, and I see, fast food, apps, whatever it is,
right.
If I see a bunch of stuff where your money is going, that tells me what you value.
Yeah.
That's the spending lesson right there.
Or the direction you're driving.
Correct.
Yeah. And, and I think back to the jobs things and what kids can do, and understanding that they're going to get paid on what somebody else values them for. That's one of the big reasons why there's a big uproar, and it's a whole different podcast about the $15 an hour minimum wage. Those jobs were never meant to be life-sustaining jobs. They were transition jobs for teenagers or people coming, working through college to get to that job they want to do. The problem is that industry has grown so much that to have a $15 an hour person is going to give you an $8 hamburger. And is that really, again, back to your spending habits, are you willing to spend $8 on a hamburger just because you want to make $15 an hour working? Yeah,
that's a whole podcast on economics. And what I would say is we could easily get back and forth in the debate. My number one thing that I would say is like, that is not, if that's not where you want to be, then we don't need to concern ourselves with, well, should you be getting paid this? No, we should be planning to figure out, how do I bring more value to the marketplace? Right. What skills do I need? There's tons of jobs out there where they can't hire people,
right? Because
people don't have the skills. And so that is where I would be focusing on, with my kids, is like, let's not worry about whether or not you're going to get paid $11 or $12 an hour. Let's sit here. Is this where we want to be for the next 25 years?
Yeah.
Where it takes potentially a government mandate for you to get a raise.
Right. Exactly.
That's not where we want to be.
Yeah. And we're not far from some of those jobs being automated anyways. And then if you talk to like my parents, your parents' generation, they're coming out of industries that are manual labor industries. Some of them are not as manual as they used to be, whether it's masonry, welding, that sort of stuff that kids can literally go in and come out making more money than kids in college, and
it's
understanding that. But that, again, that's a whole different podcast. So the fifth item I want to talk about today as we kind of wrap this up is debt. I think two of the biggest debts when I think about teenagers today, when I look at young 20-year-olds, I have two girls that are in their 20s, And I look around when you start hearing Charles Payne talking or Dave Ramsey talking, the two biggest debts that teenagers seem to accrue are credit card debt, because parents are trying to hook them up with a credit card to help build their credit, or two, school debt. I know with my daughters, when both of them wanted to go to school, we gave them a budget of what they wanted to do. They picked a whole different school, which is, again, another podcast in itself. And for them to finish out, we said, hey, it's going to take either one, us emptying everything we got and you working through that, or you're going to have to acquire some school loan debt. Again, whole nother podcast is watching these students go out and go to get an education in something that one doesn't equal, the pay doesn't equal the debt, whether if they take out a school loan, or two, the job just doesn't exist except for a handful of people. But when it comes to debt, how do you advise your clients on the best way maybe to avoid debt? And then is there a such thing as a good debt to take on?
That's a big one. So, in a lot of cases, for most people, at some point in your life, debt's unavoidable. Right. I mean, just think about getting a mortgage. Most people will never have the wealth to be able to just go out and buy a house and write a check. They're going to have to finance a home. We're seeing that a lot with one of the debts you mentioned, which was college debt, student loan debt. And, we were talking a little bit before we started recording, my philosophy about college is college should be a business decision for the family. And one of the mistakes that I think a lot of families make is they don't talk about what the family is going to be able to do realistically for college until we're dealing with a junior or senior in high school. At that point, they have their own ideas about what they want to do. They may have their own dreams about where they want to go, may or may not know what they want to study, but they know they want to go to XYZ school.
Right.
And I think that some of that can be mitigated by talking about it earlier on. Remember, I said talking about money, explaining, helping them understand it. One of the things where I feel like student debt and student loans are so egregious, where we just fail young people and their parents so much, is the simple fact that you have 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds who most of them have never, ever had to make a significant financial decision.
Right.
And then we're asking them to mortgage their future with a student loan. They can't do the calculus. They can't say, well, all right, if I go to this school and I take out this amount of debt, this is what I've got to earn to pay this off in a reasonable time.
Right.
And a lot of times the trade-off doesn't make sense. The career earnings potential for some of these jobs just is not there. And so we got to do a better way as a society, as a culture. We got to do a better way to do college. And everybody's got to come to the table on that. There's personal responsibility, but there's also the higher education. There's also government stuff, and it's a mess. But what I would tell people is, one is with student loan debt, I'm not saying avoid it at all costs, but in some cases it makes sense. I mean, if you're going to go be a doctor, right, or you're going to be a pharmacist, let's find out, is there an economical path to get you there? But that's a career where you have a chance to get those loans paid off, right? If you're going to go, this is where it's really sad, and teachers don't get mad at me, but a lot of teachers go into get massive student loan debt. But the teaching vocation right now, you can see what the pay scale looks like.
Yep.
And you have a lot of teachers that go on and they get their undergrad and they get their master's and they have student loan debt, and they're carrying that debt for years and years and years because they don't have the earnings potential to pay it off. So those are the kind of conversations that may not be they may be uncomfortable, but they're important to have and not let it be unspoken. Credit card debt is another one. I mean, to me, I kind of go back. I say credit cards are a black belt move, right? I'm a martial artist, so do you give white belts black belt moves? No, you don't. You give them basics and fundamentals, because once they understand the basics and fundamentals, then we can start progressing them along. So your teenagers, don't need to worry about building credit.
Right.
That's silly. They don't. They need to know, like, hey, can I actually save money? Can I actually have a job where I get paid for my time, and when I get my paycheck, I can actually save some of that?
Right.
That's the lesson that they need to figure out. Like, can they save? If they can't save, why on earth would we give them other people's money where they could spend it on credit?
Right.
That's not the lesson. So the lesson is can we teach them, hey, the value of work, what does it look like trading your hours for dollars, and can I save that money? And then do I have enough surplus over where I can spend, I can save, and I can give some?
Right. Yeah. So I think there's some natural debt that comes along, like you said, with the mortgage and stuff like that. So I think there's some things. I don't know if there's ever a term as good debt, but there's some necessity debt, in helping students realize that if it doesn't have to be debt, why make it debt? I heard a person a long time ago, and I'll admit I never followed this philosophy. They bought a car, paid it off, and they continued to make payments after they paid it off to themselves, so that when it was ready for another car, they paid cash for the next car. They bought it cheaper because they paid cash, but then they didn't carry the interest rate, whether it was 2.2 to 10.2.
Right.
I mean, back in the day, we kid with our girls. My daughter just bought a house, and the interest rate she got was phenomenal. When Diane and I bought our first house in '95, I think our interest rate was like 7.8, 8.2.
Right.
And, right now everybody's fighting for a 1.75 before they go back up. So I'm like, man, how much money did I give away over time? So I think there's a lot of principles. Let me take that back. There's a lot of subcategories to these 5 principles
Sure.
that we could teach teenagers. So with that being said, man, I appreciate you coming on today. I'm hoping that this podcast gets parents talking, gets students talking about, okay, what can I do? And I hope they realize that one of the things that I think when it comes to finances is parents are very prideful. They don't want to reach out and ask for help. One, because they're having a hard time teaching their student the same way they are sometimes with the Bible. They don't know it well enough to teach it, so they don't teach finances. They may have made it through it the way they're doing it, knowing that it wasn't the right way. They just got lucky. So with that, if a parent or a teenager wanted to reach out to you and say, Michael, I loved what I heard. How can we talk a little more in depth about one or all these 5 principles? How can we talk about investment? How can we talk about college spending? How would they get a hold of you?
Well, I appreciate that. I have a website. I have a personal website, and it's my name, michaelhbaker.com. So you can go to my website. There's a contact form there. You could click on that and say, hey, schedule a quick call, and that'll set you up, put you right on my calendar, and we'll get connected that way. I think that's the easiest way to do it.
All right, good deal. Well, listen, thanks again for joining us on the Proverbs 9:9 podcast as we try to not only share some biblical insights with you, from Scripture and different sermon series that I'm doing, but also as we try to bring about some certain topics that will mean something to you. And I think this is definitely one that parents will find very helpful. Michael, appreciate your time. I know you're a busy man being the co-CEO, the COO, the CFO, and the janitor of your company.
Absolutely.
So, until next time, thank you for being here.